The cabin wasn't on any map. I found it by accident, half buried in the thick pines of Black River woods, its old wooden frame sagging under decades of neglect. The roof dipped in the middle like a broken spine, and the windows were clouded with grime, reflecting nothing but the gray sky above. I had been driving for hours, my GPS long dead, the roads narrowing into dirt paths that twisted deeper into the forest. My phone had no signal. The trees pressed in from all sides, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. I told myself I'd stop for the night, just until morning, then find my way back to the highway. The key was under a moss-covered rock near the front steps. It fit the lock with a rusty screech. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something sour like old meat. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, my boots leaving prints in the dust. The cabin was small. One room with a wood stove in the corner, a moth-eaten couch, and a table covered in yellowed newspapers. The dates were from 1987. A single bed sat against the far wall, its mattress stained and sagging. I dropped my bag on the floor and rubbed my arms. The cold here wasn't the crisp kind. It was the kind that clung to your skin, seeping into your bones. I built a fire in the stove, the flames casting long shadows on the walls. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. I told myself it was just the storm, but then I heard it, a soft thump from beneath the floorboards. I froze. Came again, a slow, deliberate drag, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. My breath hitched. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon, maybe, or a possum, but animals don't drag things. I knelt, pressing my ear to the floor. The sound stopped. Silence. Then, asterisk scratch, 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 asterisk, like nails on wood. I stood so fast my head spun. My hands shook as I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it at the floor. There, near the stove, a trapdoor. The wood was warped, the iron ring handle crusted with rust. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The hinges screamed as I pulled. The smell hit me first. Rot, wet earth, and something metallic. Blood. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a set of rough-cut stairs leading down into the black. I took one step, then another. The basement was small, the walls lined with shelves, jars, dozens of them, filled with dark liquid. Floating inside, things I didn't want to see, things that used to be alive. At the far end, a figure sat slumped against the wall. A man. His skin was gray, his mouth slack. His eyes, milky, unseeing, stared right at me. Around his neck, a rope tied to a beam above. His fingers were curled into claws, the nails broken and black with dirt. He hadn't hanged himself. The rope was too short. Someone had put him there. A sound behind me. I turned. The trapdoor slammed shut. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the shadow moving across the floor. Then the scratching started again. Closer this time. The road had been empty for miles. Just me, my car, and the endless stretch of asphalt cutting through the forest. I was supposed to be in Cedar Falls by now, but a wrong turn had taken me deep into Black River woods, a place my dad used to warn me about. People go missing there, he'd say. Asterisk, the trees don't let him out. Asterisk, I laughed it off back then. Now, with the gas gauge hovering near empty and the sky darkening, I wasn't laughing. The cabin appeared like a mirage, a crooked silhouette against the pines. I pulled over, my tires crunching on dead leaves. The place looked abandoned, but the porch light was on, flickering, like the bulb was about to die. I knocked. No answer. The key was under the rock. The scratching isn't just beneath me anymore. It's in the walls. Something's down here with me, and it's not the dead man. The road was narrow, barely more than a dirt path cutting through the thick West Virginia forest. My headlights barely held back the darkness, the trees pressing in on both sides like silent watchers. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, and now I was just following the handwritten directions scrawled on a napkin. Asterisk turn left at the old mill. Follow the creek for 2 miles. The cabin is at the end. Asterisk. The tires crunched over gravel as I rolled to a stop. The cabin was smaller than I expected. Just a single-story wooden box with a sagging porch and a rusted metal roof. The windows were dark. No smoke from the chimney. No car parked outside. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The air outside was cold, sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth. I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat and stepped out. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no wind, just the creak of the porch under my boots as I walked up to the door. The key was where my brother said it would be, under a loose floorboard near the steps. The door groaned open, and the smell hit me, mold, dust, and something else. Something faintly sour, like old meat. I flicked on the flashlight from my phone and swept it across the room. A couch with torn upholstery, a wood stove in the corner, a kitchenette with a chipped countertop. I dropped my bag on the table and checked my phone. No signal. Of course, this was supposed to be a quiet weekend away. No work, no people, just me, a few books, and the woods. My brother had offered the cabin, said it was peaceful. He hadn't been here in years. I lit the oil lamp on the table. The flame flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The place felt wrong. Not haunted, I don't believe in that, but like something bad had happened here. I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I ate a cold dinner, canned beans and crackers, and tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows. Black squares of nothing. No stars, no moon, just dark. I went to bed early. The mattress was thin, the blanket stiff with age. I left the oil lamp burning on the nightstand. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound, a scrape, like something dragging across the porch. I lay still, listening. The wind? An animal? Then it came again. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering. The lamp had burned out, leaving the room in total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, fingers shaking as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the black, landing on the door. It was open. I didn't leave it open. I stood, my breath coming too fast. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped toward the door. Cold air seeped in from outside. I shone the light out into the night. Nothing, just the empty porch, the trees beyond. Then I saw it. Muddy footprints, leading inside, fresh. My throat tightened. Someone was here. I backed up, scanning the room. The kitchen, the couch, the shadows in the corners. A floorboard groaned behind me. I spun around. The man was tall, his face gaunt, his clothes dirty. He stood just inside the bedroom doorway, watching me. No words, no demands, just his eyes, cold and empty. I ran, out the door, into the trees. Branches lashed at my arms, my face. My breath burned in my lungs. I didn't look back. I don't know how long I ran, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in the dirt, gasping. The cabin was gone. The man was gone, but I knew he was still out there, waiting. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I followed the creek back to the main road. I didn't stop walking until I hit pavement, until I flagged down a passing truck. The police went to the cabin later. They found nothing, no footprints, no sign of anyone, but they didn't check the basement. I didn't tell them about the basement because I hadn't gone down there, and I never will. The road was barely a road anymore, just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed up by roots and weeds. My headlights barely held back the dark, flickering over potholes and fallen branches. The GPS had given up an hour ago, and now I was just following the directions scrawled on a crumpled receipt. Left at the dead oak, right at the creek, then straight until the trees thin out. I shouldn't have come. The cabin wasn't even mine. It belonged to my uncle, a man I hadn't seen in years. When the lawyer called to say he was dead and left the place to me, I figured it was worth checking out. A free cabin in the woods? Could be worth something. Could be a dump. Either way, I needed the money. The tires crunched over gravel as I pulled up to the clearing. The cabin was smaller than I expected. Just one story, with a sagging roof and a porch that looked like it might collapse if I stepped too hard. The wood was gray and cracked, the windows blacked out by dust and grime. No lights, no signs of life, just the wind hissing through the trees. I killed the engine. The silence was worse than the noise. No crickets, no owls, just the creak of branches and the slow, steady drip of rainwater from the gutters. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. My boots sank into the mud as I walked toward the porch. The steps groaned under my weight, the wood soft with decay. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me first. Mold, mildew, and something else. Something metallic. Blood? No, not fresh. Old, stale. The beam of my flashlight cut through the dark, revealing a single room with a rusted wood stove, a sagging couch, and a table covered in yellowed newspapers. The floorboards were warped, the walls stained with water damage. I stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a soft click. That's when I saw the footprints. Not mine. Mine were still fresh in the dust, leading from the door to where I stood. These were older, fainter, but unmistakable boot prints larger than mine, pressed deep into the floor. Someone had been here before me. Recently, I followed them with my flashlight. They led to the far wall, where a door stood slightly ajar. A bedroom? A closet? I moved closer. The air was colder here, the smell stronger. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for the door. It swung open before I could touch it. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center. And on that chair, a hunting knife, its blade dark with dried blood. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just some abandoned cabin. Something had happened here. Something bad. I turned to leave. That's when I heard it. The faintest creak of wood from outside. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving toward the porch. Someone was here. I killed the flashlight and backed into the shadows. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. A long silence. Then knocking. 3 slow, heavy raps against the wood. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knob turned. The door opened. A man stood there, silhouetted against the moonlight. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of something in his hand. Another knife. He stepped inside. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. He didn't see me. Not yet. He moved slowly, scanning the room, his boots scraping against the floor. Then he stopped. His head turned toward the bedroom, toward the knife on the chair. He knew. I had to move. Now, I lunged for the door. He spun, swinging the knife. I ducked, felt the blade whistle past my ear, and slammed into him shoulder first. We crashed into the table, sending newspapers flying. He grunted, grabbed my jacket, and threw me against the wall. Pain exploded through my back. I scrambled up as he came at me again. This time, I grabbed the wood stove's iron poker and swung, connected with his ribs. He staggered, wheezing, and I hit him again. Harder. He dropped the knife. I didn't wait. I ran. Out the door, down the porch, into the trees. Branches lashed at my face. Roots snagged my feet, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard him, crashing through the underbrush, cursing, gaining ground. I reached my car. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life just as he burst from the trees. Our eyes met for one terrible second. Then I slammed the gas. The tires spun, kicking up mud and gravel. He lunged, his fingers scraping the bumper as I fishtailed onto the road. I didn't look back. The cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. The police found the cabin 3 days later. No sign of the man, but they did find other things. Bloodstains under the floorboards, old bones buried in the woods. Turns out my uncle hadn't just owned the place. He'd been using it. I sold the land, never went back. But sometimes when I'm driving at night, I check the rearview mirror, just in case. The cabin was old, tucked deep in the woods of northern Maine. far from any town or road. I found it listed online. Cheap, quiet, perfect for someone who just wanted to disappear for a few days. The pictures showed a cozy little place with a stone fireplace and thick wooden beams. No electricity, no neighbors, just peace. I should have known better. The drive took hours longer than it should have. The GPS lost signal 20 miles from the nearest gas station, and the dirt road leading to the cabin was barely a road at all. Just 2 tire tracks cutting through the trees, overgrown with weeds. Branches scraped against the sides of my car like fingernails. By the time I pulled up to the cabin, the sun was already sinking behind the pines, casting long shadows across the clearing. The place looked worse in person. The wood was gray and weathered, the front porch sagging in the middle like it might collapse under my weight. The windows were dark, the glass cloudy with dust. A rusted padlock hung from the door, but the key the owner had mailed me turned easily, like it had been used recently. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something sharp like wet metal. The floorboards creaked under my boots as I stepped inside, dropping my bag by the door. The fireplace was cold, filled with ashes. A single oil lamp sat on the table, next to a box of matches. I lit the lamp. The flickering light stretched the shadows of the furniture across the walls, making them shift like something was moving just out of sight. I told myself it was just the wind. The cabin groaned around me, the old wood settling. I should have left then, but I didn't. I unpacked my things, some food, a sleeping bag, a knife I always carried when hiking. The silence was heavy, pressing against my ears. No birds, no insects, just the occasional whisper of leaves outside. Night fell fast. The darkness outside the windows was absolute, like the trees had swallowed the world. I kept the lamp burning, but the light didn't reach far. Every sound made my skin prickle. The rustle of the wind, the creak of the floorboards, the distant snap of a branch. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging noise outside, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I froze. It stopped. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was an animal. A deer, a bear. But then it came again, closer this time. A scrape, then a thud, like a footstep. I grabbed the knife. The noise circled the cabin, slow and deliberate. Not an animal. Something that knew I was inside. I backed toward the fireplace, my pulse hammering in my throat. The lamp flickered, throwing jagged shadows across the walls. The dragging sound stopped right outside the door. Silence, then knocking. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the wood. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The doorknob twisted. The lock held. A low, wet sound came from the other side. A breath, a sigh, something human but not quite right. Then nothing. I waited. Minutes passed. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I thought it was over. Then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward as an arm shot through. Pale, streaked with dirt, fingers clawing at the air. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. The flame caught the edge of the rug, spreading fast. The figure at the window pulled itself through, glass tearing into its skin. A man, or what used to be one. His clothes were torn, his face gaunt, eyes wild. Blood dripped from his hands where the glass had cut him, but he didn't seem to feel it. He lunged. I swung the knife. The blade caught his shoulder, but he didn't stop. His hands closed around my throat, slamming me into the wall. The fire spread, smoke filling the room. I kicked, twisted, drove the knife into his side. He screamed, a raw animal sound, and let go. I ran, out the door into the dark. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted for the trees. Behind me, the cabin burned, flames licking up the walls. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in the dirt. The woods were silent except for the distant crackle of fire. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally stood, the sky was turning gray with dawn. The cabin was gone, reduced to blackened beams and ash. There was no sign of the man, but I knew he was still out there, and he wasn't the only one. I found the others as I walked back to my car, shallow graves, half hidden under leaves. Dozens of them, fresh. The owner of the cabin had never mailed me a key. Someone else had, and they'd been waiting. I drove until the tank was empty, then kept walking. I don't sleep much anymore, and I never go into the woods alone. The tires of my old pickup truck crunched over the frozen dirt road, the sound sharp in the dead silence of the woods. Snow had started to fall again, thick and heavy, sticking to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. I leaned forward, squinting through the glass, my fingers tight around the wheel. The GPS had stopped working miles back, and now I was relying on the faded, hand-drawn map my uncle had given me. The cabin was supposed to be a retreat, somewhere quiet, isolated, where I could finally finish my book. No distractions, no noise, just me and the wilderness. But as the trees closed in around the road, their branches scraping against the truck like skeletal fingers, I started to wonder if I'd made a mistake. The road narrowed until it was barely more than a trail. The truck lurched over hidden roots, the suspension groaning. Then, finally, I saw it. A small, wooden cabin tucked between the pines, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of the snow. The chimney stood crooked, like a broken bone. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. The cold seeped in almost immediately, biting at my skin. I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out, my boots sinking into the snow. The air smelled like pine and something else, something damp and old, like wet earth. The key was under the rock near the porch, just like my uncle said. The lock was stiff, but after a few hard twists, the door creaked open. The inside was dark, the only light coming from the gray haze of the snow outside. I fumbled for the light switch, half expecting nothing to happen, but then a dim, yellow bulb flickered to life. The cabin was small, one room with a wood stove, a sagging couch, and a narrow bed in the corner. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. A single window looked out into the woods, the glass fogged with age. I dropped my bag on the bed and started a fire in the stove. The wood was dry, thank God, and soon the heat began to push back the cold. I sat on the couch, listening to the wind howl outside, the sound like something alive, something angry. Night came fast. The snow kept falling, piling up against the door. I ate a can of beans straight from the can, too tired to care about heating them. The silence was heavy, pressing against my ears. No cars, no people, no animals. Just the wind and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. I fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling. Something woke me. I sat up, my heart hammering. The fire had died down to embers, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. The wind still howled, but there was another sound, a soft, rhythmic thump, like something hitting the side of the cabin. I held my breath, listening. I told myself it was just a branch, knocked loose by the wind. But the sound came again, closer this time. Near the window, I got up slowly, my legs stiff from the cold. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The window was black, the glass reflecting only the dim glow of the dying fire. I leaned closer, peering out. Nothing, just snow and trees. Then, a shadow moved, fast just at the edge of the tree line. I jerked back, my pulse roaring in my ears. My hands shook as I grabbed the hunting knife from my bag. The blade was cold against my palm. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just an animal, a deer or a fox. But something in my gut told me it wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, the knife in my lap, and waited for dawn. Morning came slow, the light bleeding through the snow-heavy clouds. I hadn't slept. Every sound had been magnified. The groan of the cabin, the whisper of the wind, the occasional snap of a branch outside. I forced myself to get up, to open the door. The snow had piled up to my knees, and the cold hit me like a punch. My breath came out in white clouds as I scanned the tree line. Footprints, not mine. They circled the cabin, pressed deep into the snow, and they led into the woods. I followed them, my boots crunching in the snow. The trees were thick here, the branches woven together like a cage. The prince stopped at a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A figure hunched over in the snow. A man. His clothes were torn, his skin gray with cold. His fingers were black with frostbite. Dead. I stumbled back, my stomach twisting. He hadn't been there long, a day, maybe two. But the way he was positioned, like he had been running, like something had chased him here. I turned and ran back to the cabin, my heart slamming against my ribs. I locked the door and grabbed my phone. No signal. I was alone, and something was out there. The next few hours passed in a blur. I packed my things, my hands shaking. I wasn't staying here, not now. But when I tried to start the truck, the engine just groaned. Dead. The cold must have killed the battery. I was trapped. Night fell again. I kept the fire going, the knife close. The wind screamed outside, shaking the cabin. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. I froze. No one should be out here. No one was out here. The knocking came again. Harder this time. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then silence. I waited. 1 minute, 2. Then a scraping sound, like something dragging along the side of the cabin. I gripped the knife tighter. The scraping stopped right outside the window. I turned my head slowly, my muscles locked. A face pressed against the glass. Pale, sunken eyes. A mouth stretched into a grin. Not the dead man from the woods. Someone else. I screamed. The figure lunged. I don't remember running. I don't remember how I got out. But I was in the snow, stumbling through the trees, the cold burning my lungs. Behind me, footsteps crunched. Fast. Getting closer. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in the snow. Then lights. A truck. A road. Someone shouted. Hands grabbed me, pulled me up. The last thing I saw before passing out was the tree line, and the shadow standing there, watching. The police found the cabin. They found the dead man in the woods. They didn't find the thing that chased me. They said the dead man was a hiker. Got lost. Froze to death. But I know what I saw. And sometimes at night, I still hear the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate raps, like it's waiting for me to answer. I never should have come here. The thought pounds in my head like a hammer against my skull as I stand in the middle of the cabin, the wooden floorboards groaning under my weight. The air is thick with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something sour, like old meat left out too long. The windows are grimy, letting in only slivers of the fading daylight. Outside, the forest is silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just the quiet. I don't remember how I got here. One moment, I was driving down Route 17, the radio playing some old song I didn't care about. The next, my headlights caught something. A deer, maybe, or a shadow, and I swerved. The car skidded, tires screaming, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was here. The cabin is small, just one room with a rusted wood stove in the corner, a sagging cot against the wall, and a table with a single chair. The door is locked from the outside. I tried it 3 times before I gave up. The windows don't budge, either painted shut or nailed down, I can't tell. I rub my arms, feeling the chill seep into my bones. My jacket is still in the car. Wherever that is, there's a noise, a soft scrape, like something dragging across the floor. I freeze, my breath catching in my throat. It's coming from under the cot. I don't want to look, but I have to. I crouch down, my knees popping, and lift the edge of the thin mattress. Dust floats in the air, catching what little light there is. Underneath, there's nothing but more floorboards. Then I see it, a small, dark stain. I press my fingers to it. It's dry, but the color is unmistakable. Blood. My stomach twists. I stand up too fast, my vision swimming. The room tilts, and I grab the table to steady myself. That's when I notice the scratches. Deep grooves in the wood, like someone or something dug their nails into it over and over. Some are fresh, the splinters still pale and raw. Others are old, darkened with time. I step back, my pulse hammering in my ears. Something's wrong. Not just the cabin, not just the blood or the scratches. Something else. Something about me. I look down at my hands. My right knuckle is split, the skin torn and red. I don't remember hurting it. Another noise. This time it's outside. A slow, heavy footstep on the porch. The wood creaks under the weight. I don't move. Don't breathe. The doorknob rattles, then stops. Silence. I wait, every muscle locked tight. A minute passes. 2. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath and force myself to step toward the window. The glass is filthy, but I wipe a spot clean with my sleeve and peer outside. The forest is empty. No footprints in the dirt. No sign of anyone. But I know what I heard. I turn back to the room, my mind racing. There has to be a way out. A loose board, a weak spot in the wall. Something. I start searching, running my hands along the walls, kicking at the floor. Nothing gives. Then I see it. A hatch in the floor, half hidden under a frayed rug. I yank the rug aside, my fingers finding the metal ring. It's cold against my skin. I pull, and the hatch opens with a groan, revealing a set of narrow stairs leading down into darkness. The smell hits me first. Rot, stale, thick, clinging to the back of my throat. I gag, covering my nose with my sleeve. I don't want to go down there, but I don't have a choice. I take the first step. The wood groans under my weight. The second step is worse, the third even more so. By the time I reach the bottom, my legs are shaking. It's colder down here. The air is damp, the walls slick with moisture. The only light comes from the open hatch above, casting long shadows. Then I see them. Bones, piled in the corner, yellowed and broken. Some are small animal, maybe. Others aren't. A human skull stares back at me, the eye sockets black and empty. My breath comes in short, sharp gasps. I back up, my foot hitting something soft. I look down. A body, fresh. The skin is gray, the lips pulled back in a silent scream. The eyes are gone, the sockets filled with something black and writhing. Maggots. I stumble back, bile rising in my throat. That's when I hear it. The hatch slams shut above me. Darkness swallows me whole. I scream, scrambling for the stairs, my hands slipping on the damp wood. I reach the top, slamming my palms against the hatch. It doesn't move. Something grabs my ankle. I kick, my heel connecting with bone. The grip loosens and I pull free, falling back down the stairs. Pain explodes in my side as I hit the ground. Above me, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I crawl backward, my hands sinking into something wet. The body. I gag, wiping my hands on my shirt. But the smell is everywhere now, filling my lungs. The footsteps stop at the top of the stairs. A shadow moves in the darkness. Then a voice. You shouldn't have come here. I know that voice. It's mine. The road was barely a road anymore, just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed by weeds and potholes. My headlights barely held back the dark, flickering over gnarled branches that reached like skeletal fingers. The GPS had given up miles back, and now I was just driving blind, hoping I hadn't missed the turn. I shouldn't have come. The cabin wasn't mine. It belonged to my uncle, a man I hadn't seen in years. When the lawyer called to say he was dead and left the place to me, I figured it was worth checking out. A free house in the woods? Why not? But now, with the trees pressing in and the engine groaning beneath me, I regretted every decision that led me here. The tires crunched over gravel as I finally spotted the driveway, if you could even call it that. It was more like a gap in the trees, barely wide enough for the car. Branches scraped against the windows as I eased forward, the headlights catching glimpses of the cabin ahead. It was smaller than I expected. Just a single-story wooden box with a sagging roof and a porch that looked one strong wind away from collapsing. The windows were dark, the glass grimy with years of neglect. A rusted metal chimney poked out of the roof, crooked like a broken bone. I killed the engine. The silence was immediate. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of the cabin settling. My breath fogged in the cold air as I stepped out, the ground soft under my boots. The air smelled damp, like rotting leaves and wet earth. The key the lawyer gave me was stiff in the lock, but after some wrestling, the door groaned open. The inside was worse than I imagined. Dust coated everything, the sagging couch, the wooden table, the old wood stove in the corner. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, the pull chain swaying slightly, like someone had just touched it. I told myself it was just the draft. I dropped my bag on the table, sending up a cloud of dust. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved deeper inside. The kitchen was a disaster. Peeling linoleum, a rust-stained sink, a fridge that hummed weakly but smelled like something had died inside. I didn't open it. The bedroom was the only other room, just a mattress on a metal frame. Yellowed sheets still rumpled like someone had just gotten up. A single nightstand held an old oil lamp, the glass smudged with fingerprints. I sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing my face. This was a mistake. I should have just sold the place unseen. But now I was here, and the thought of driving back in the dark made my stomach twist. I decided to stay the night. The wood stove took forever to light, but eventually, a weak fire crackled inside. I dragged the couch closer, the fabric rough under my hands, smelling of mildew and age. The light from the flames flickered over the walls, making shadows dance in the corners. That's when I noticed the marks. At first, I thought they were just scratches, the kind you'd expect in an old cabin. But as the firelight shifted, I saw they were too deliberate. Lines carved into the wood, some shallow, some deep, like tally marks. Hundreds of them. My throat tightened. I stood, stepping closer. The marks covered the wall beside the stove, some so old they darkened with time, others fresher, the wood still pale where it had been cut. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough edges. Then I saw the dates. Scratched beneath some of the lines were numbers. Asterisk 10-14-98, June 23rd, 02. 3-7-12. Asterisk the most recent one was just a few months ago. 9-30-23. My uncle died in August. The fire popped, making me jump. My heart hammered as I backed away, my eyes scanning the rest of the cabin. Had he been counting something? Days? Weeks? No. The realization hit me like ice water. They weren't tallies. They were kills. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I stumbled toward the door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. I needed to leave. Then I heard it. A creak. Not from the cabin. From outside. Footsteps on the porch. Slow. Deliberate. I froze, my breath trapped in my chest. The firelight flickered, casting my shadow huge against the wall. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. The knob turned. It was unlocked. I hadn't locked it. The door groaned open. I didn't wait to see who or what was there. I ran. Through the back door, into the trees, branches whipping at my face as I crashed through the underbrush. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. Behind me, something moved. Something fast. Something that knew these woods better than I ever would. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. My clothes were torn. My hands scratched and bleeding from the branches. The woods seemed endless, the trees closing in tighter the farther I went. Then finally I saw lights. A road. A truck. I stumbled onto the asphalt, waving my arms, my voice raw from screaming. The truck screeched to a stop, the driver's face pale as he rolled down the window. Jesus, man. What the hell happened to you? I couldn't speak. I just pointed back toward the trees, my whole body shaking. The driver followed my gaze, then frowned. There's nothing back there. I turned. He was right. Just trees. No cabin. No trail. Nothing. But I knew. It was there. And so was he. The police didn't believe me. They said the cabin had burned down years ago. That my uncle died in a hospital, not in the woods. That the marks on the walls were just old damage. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind rattles the windows just right, I swear I can still hear the creak of footsteps on the porch. The trees loom over the narrow dirt road, their branches clawing at the roof of my car like skeletal fingers. The GPS lost signal an hour ago, and now I'm just following the faded signs nailed to the trunks. Their paint peeling, the wood rotting. Whispering Pines Campground, 5 miles. I grip the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles are white. The air inside the car is thick, stale. I crack the window, and the scent of damp earth and pine needles floods in. The wind carries something else too, something sour like meat left out too long. The road gets worse. Potholes jar the car, rattling my teeth. The headlights cut through the growing darkness, but the beams feel weak, like they're being swallowed by the forest. I check my phone again. No service, just like the last 20 times. Then I see it, the cabin, the smaller than I expected. The wood is dark, weathered by years of storms. The roof sags in the middle and one of the windows is boarded up. The porch creaks under my weight as I step out of the car, the sound too loud in the silence. Keys in hand, I unlock the door. The hinges scream. Inside, the air is heavy with dust and mildew. The floorboards groan under my boots. I drop my bag on the couch, sending up a puff of gray. This place was supposed to be a retreat. A week alone in the woods to clear my head after the divorce. No noise, no people, no reminders of the life I'd lost. But now that I'm here, the quiet feels wrong. I start a fire in the stone fireplace. The wood is damp, and the flames sputter, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The light doesn't reach the corners. The darkness there feels solid, like it's watching. Night falls fast. The wind picks up, howling through the trees. Branches scrape against the roof. I tell myself it's just the storm moving in, but my skin prickles. I eat a cold dinner, canned beans, crackers. The silence presses in. No TV, no radio, just the crackling fire and the wind. I try to read, but my eyes keep darting to the window. The glass reflects the room, warped and wavering. For a second, I think I see movement outside. Just my imagination. I go to bed early. The mattress sags, the sheets smell like mothballs. I leave the lamp on. The bulb flickers. Then I hear it. A thump, coming from below. The crawl space. I sit up, ears straining. Maybe it's an animal, a raccoon or possum. But the sound comes again, slow, deliberate, like something dragging itself across the dirt. My breath is too loud. I grab the hunting knife from my bag. The metal is cold in my hand. Another thump, closer this time. I step onto the floor. The wood is icy under my bare feet. The noise stops. Silence. Then, a scrape. Right beneath me. I kneel, press my ear to the floor. The smell hits me first, wet earth, rot. Then the sound. Breathing. Shallow, wet. Something is down there. I bolt up, heart hammering. My hands shake as I pull on my boots. I need to see. I need to know. The hatch to the crawl space is in the kitchen. A rusted metal ring set into the floor. I grab it, yank. The wood resists, then gives with a groan. Blackness yawns below. The smell is worse now, thick, choking. I shine my phone light down. Dirt, cobwebs, and footprints, fresh, leading deeper under the house. My throat tightens. No, this isn't right. I should leave, get in the car and drive. But my legs won't move. Then I hear it, a whisper, from the darkness. Not words, just breath. A low, rattling inhale. Something shifts in the shadows. I slam the hatch shut, throw my weight on it. Something thuds against the wood from below. Once, twice. I scramble back, grab my keys, my bag. The front door is only 10 steps away. The floor erupts behind me, with splinters. A hand, pale, dirt-caked, bursts through the boards. Fingers claw at the air, grasping. I don't scream. I don't think. I run. The night swallows me. Branches whip my face. My car is only 20 feet away. The door is open. I skid to a stop. I locked it. I know I locked it. The interior light is on. The seats are empty. but the glove box hangs open, papers scattered, and on the dashboard, a single muddy handprint. I turn. The cabin door swings wide. The fire inside has died. Only embers glow now, painting the doorway red. Something moves in the dark. Not an animal, not a ghost. A man, tall, thin. His clothes are torn, his skin streaked with dirt. His eyes catch the moonlight wide, unblinking. He tilts his head, smiles. I run. The road is endless. My lungs burn. Branches tear at my clothes. Behind me, footsteps. Steady. Close. I don't look back. Then headlights. A truck rounds the bend. I wave my arms, scream. The brakes screech. The driver rolls down his window. You all right? I glance behind me. The road is empty, but far back between the trees, a shadow stands, watching. I get in the truck. We drive. I don't look back. Epilogue. The police find the cabin. The crawl space is dug out. A tunnel leads deep into the earth. At the end, a hole. And inside it, bones. Old, new, some still wearing clothes. They never find the man. But sometimes, when the wind is right, I swear I catch that smell again. Damp earth and rot. And I know, he's still out there. The cabin wasn't much, just a small wooden box tucked into the trees, miles from the nearest town. I found it online, some cheap rental for people who wanted to disconnect. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just silence and nature. Sounded perfect after months of city noise. I drove up Friday evening, the road narrowing until it was barely more than a dirt path. The trees pressed in close, their branches scraping against the sides of my car like skeletal fingers. The GPS had lost signal an hour ago, but the handwritten directions led me straight to it. A single-story cabin with a sagging porch and dark windows. The key was under a rock, just like the owner said. The door creaked open, and the smell hit me first. Damp wood, mildew, something faintly metallic. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. Of course. The owner had mentioned the generator needed to be started manually. I stepped inside, my boots thudding against the wooden floor. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for early October. I set my bag down and pulled out my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. A couch with faded upholstery, a wood stove, a small kitchenette with an old propane stove. Dust coated everything. The generator was out back, hidden under a tarp. I yanked the cord once, twice. On the third pull, it roared to life. Lights flickered inside. Good enough. I unpacked, trying to ignore the way the cabin groaned in the wind. Just old wood settling, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Night fell fast. I lit the stove, the flames casting long shadows on the walls. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. I tried to read, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. Black rectangles reflecting the firelight. Then I heard it, a scrape, like something dragging across the porch. I froze. Maybe an animal, a raccoon, a possum. Came again, slower this time, deliberate. I stood, my pulse hammering in my throat. The flashlight was on the table. I grabbed it, my fingers slick with sweat. Another sound, not just scraping now, a thud, like weight shifting. I forced myself to the window, pressing my face close to the glass. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the porch. Nothing, just old wood, a few dead leaves. I exhaled, my breath fogging the glass. Maybe I was imagining things. Too much silence, too much isolation. Then I saw it. A footprint, fresh, pressed into the dust on the porch. Not mine. My stomach dropped. I hadn't walked there. I hadn't stepped off the porch since I arrived. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. The generator sputtered. The lights dimmed. No. The cabin plunged into darkness. I stumbled, my shoulder hitting the wall. The flashlight beam shook in my grip. The fire in the stove was dying, the shadows stretching longer. Another sound, not outside anymore. Inside, a creak, the floorboard near the door. Someone was in here with me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The beam of my flashlight trembled, pointed at the floor. Then I saw it, a shadow moving just outside the light. I ran. The back door, there was a back door. I crashed through it, branches whipping at my face as I sprinted into the trees. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. I didn't look back. I ran until I couldn't anymore, until I collapsed against a tree, gasping. The forest was silent. No footsteps, no breathing. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? Then I heard it. A twig snapped. Close. I wasn't alone. I forced myself up, stumbling forward. No plan, just a way. The trees thinned. A road, thank God. A road. I ran toward it, my legs giving out as I hit the pavement. Headlights. A truck. I waved my arms, screaming. The brakes screeched. The door flew open. "Jesus, you okay?" The driver yelled. I didn't answer. I just looked back at the trees. Nothing moved, but I knew something had been there, and it had been real. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. I never went back for my things. The cops searched the cabin, found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints but mine. They said it was an animal, a bear maybe, but I know what I heard. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear it. The scrape, the breath, the silence before the hunt. The thought repeats in my head like a broken record as I stand in the middle of the cabin, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The walls around me are old, the wood warped and cracked with age. The smell of damp rot thick in the air. The only light comes from the dim glow of my flashlight, its beam shaky in my trembling hands. Outside, the wind howls through the trees, branches scraping against the roof like skeletal fingers. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't feel real anymore. It started 3 days ago. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 28, an accountant from Chicago, and I came up to these woods for a weekend of hiking. Just me, my backpack, and the quiet. No phone, no distractions. Just nature. The first day was fine. The air was crisp, the trails empty. I set up camp near a small lake, cooked over a fire, slept under the stars. It was peaceful. Then the second night came. I woke up to the sound of something moving outside my tent. Not an animal, something bigger. Something that walked on 2 legs. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening as footsteps circled my tent. Slow, deliberate. Then they stopped right outside. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated. I waited until the sun came up before I dared to unzip the tent. There were footprints in the mud, boot prints, too large to be mine. I packed up fast. I didn't know who was out there, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I hiked deeper into the woods, thinking I could lose them. That was my first mistake. By afternoon, the sky turned dark. Rain started falling, thick and heavy. I needed shelter. That's when I saw the cabin. It was old, tucked between the trees like it had been forgotten. The door was unlocked. I told myself I'd just wait out the storm. But then the door locked behind me. First, I thought it was the wind. Then I saw the bolt. It had been slid shut from the inside. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. I searched the cabin, my pulse hammering in my throat. One room, a rusted stove in the corner, a table with a single chair, a bed with a stained mattress, and on the wall, scratched into the wood, names. Dozens of them, some fresh, some old. I recognized one. Emily R., 2021. My sister. She disappeared in these woods 3 years ago. They never found her. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't just some abandoned cabin. This was a trap. I turned to the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The bolt was stuck. I threw my shoulder against the wood, but it didn't give. The windows were boarded from the outside. That's when I heard it, a creak from above. I looked up. The attic hatch was open, just a crack, and in that darkness, something moved. I wasn't alone. He had been here the whole time, watching, waiting. The ladder dropped down with a thud. I grabbed the chair, swung it at the window. The wood splintered. Cold air rushed in. I didn't think. I jumped. Glass tore into my arms as I hit the ground. I ran. Branches whipped at my face. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard the cabin door slam open. Footsteps, chasing me. I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, until the trees thinned and I saw the road. A truck roared past. I screamed, waved my arms. It skidded to a stop. The driver took one look at me, bloody, wild-eyed, and threw open the door. I didn't look back as we sped away. The police found the cabin. They found the names. They found the things buried in the woods. But they never found him. Sometimes, at night, I still hear the creak of that attic hatch. And I know he's still out there. The road was barely a road anymore. Just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed by weeds and potholes. My headlights barely held back the dark, the beams shaking as the car rolled over uneven ground. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, and now I was just following the faded directions scribbled on a scrap of paper. Asterisk turn left after the old mill. Follow the trail until you see the red mailbox. The cabin is half a mile past that. Asterisk. I didn't even know why I was here. Maybe because my brother asked me to check on the place. Maybe because I needed to get away from the city, from the noise, from the mess my life had become. Or maybe because part of me wanted to see if the stories were true. The cabin had been in our family for years, but no one used it. Not since my uncle died there. The trees pressed in closer, branches scraping against the sides of the car like bony fingers. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. I rolled down the window, letting the cold rush in, listening to the silence. No crickets, no owls, just the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Then I saw it. The red mailbox, rusted and tilted to one side, barely hanging on. I turned, the car lurching as the path became even rougher. The cabin wasn't far now. I parked in front of it, killing the engine. The sudden quiet was heavy. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered, its wooden walls dark with age, the roof sagging in the middle. The front porch creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it, the wood soft in places, rotting. The key was under the rock near the steps, just like my brother said. It was cold in my hand, the metal rough with rust. The lock stuck at first, but after a few hard twists, the door groaned open. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mildew, something faintly sour underneath. The air was thick, stale. I flicked on the flashlight from my phone, sweeping the beam across the room. Dust floated in the light, swirling as I moved. The furniture was covered in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dark. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My breath fogged in the cold air. The place felt wrong. Not haunted, not like in stories, but like something bad had happened here. Like the walls remembered. I pulled the sheet off the couch, coughing as dust billowed up. The fabric underneath was stained. The color faded. I didn't sit. The kitchen was worse. The sink was full of old dishes, crusted with something dark. The fridge door hung open, the inside empty except for a single jar, its contents long turned to sludge. I didn't touch it. Upstairs was worse. The steps creaked like they might give way. The hallway was narrow, the ceiling low. The first door was a bathroom, the mirror cracked, the sink stained brown. The shower curtain was torn, half hanging off the rod. The second door was the bedroom. I pushed it open slowly. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled, like someone had left in a hurry. There were dark spots on the mattress. I didn't look too close. The closet door was slightly open. I don't know why I walked toward it. Maybe because I had to know. Maybe because I already did. Pulled it open. Empty. Just a few wire hangers, a dusty shoebox. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Then I heard it. A creak. From downstairs. I froze. The house was old. Old houses made noise. But this wasn't the wind. This wasn't the wood settling. This was footsteps. Slow. heavy, coming up the stairs. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around for a weapon, anything. There was nothing. Just the bed, the closet, the empty shoebox. The steps reached the top of the stairs. I backed into the corner, my breath coming too fast. The doorknob turned. The door opened. A man stood there, tall, thin. His face was shadowed, but I could see his eyes dark, empty. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. Then he stepped inside. I didn't think. I moved. I lunged for the window, throwing it open. Cold air rushed in. The drop was far, but not far enough to kill me. I climbed out, my hands slipping on the wet wood. I fell. The ground hit hard, knocking the air from my lungs. I rolled, pain shooting up my side. I didn't stop. I ran. Branches whipped at my face. My feet pounded against the dirt. I didn't look back. I reached the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into reverse, spinning the wheel, my tires kicking up dirt. As I pulled away, I saw him, standing on the porch, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until the trees were far behind me. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the creak of those stairs, and I know he's still waiting. The tires of my old pickup truck crunched over the gravel as I rolled to a stop. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died with a shudder. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence. No birds, no wind, just the faint creak of the truck cooling down. I hadn't planned on coming here. The cabin belonged to my uncle, a man I barely remembered. He died last month, and the lawyer said the place was mine now. I didn't want it. But after losing my job, my apartment, and what little money I had left, there weren't many options. The cabin sat in the middle of Black River Woods, a thick forest about 20 miles from the nearest town. No neighbors, no roads except the dirt path I'd just driven down. Just trees, shadows, and the quiet. I stepped out of the truck, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled like pine and something else, something old and wet. The cabin itself was small, made of dark, weathered wood. The windows were grimy, the porch sagged in the middle, and the roof looked like it was one good storm away from caving in. I walked up the steps, each one groaning under my weight. The front door was unlocked. It swung open with a slow, whining creak. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The floorboards were warped, the walls covered in peeling wallpaper. A couch sat in the middle of the room, its fabric torn and stained. A wood stove stood in the corner, rusted and cold. I dropped my bag on the floor and walked deeper inside. The kitchen was worse. A rusted sink, a fridge that smelled like something had died in it, and cabinets full of empty jars and mouse droppings. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. This was going to take work. Night came fast in the woods. I lit a lantern and set it on the table, the flickering light casting long shadows across the walls. The wind had picked up, whistling through the cracks in the windows. I tried to ignore the sounds, the creaking of the old wood, the scratching in the walls. Probably just rats. I lay on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket I'd found in a closet. It smelled musty, but it was better than freezing. Then I heard it, a slow, heavy thud against the side of the cabin. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound came again, thud, like something big was leaning against the wall. I grabbed the lantern and stood, listening. Silence. Then, from outside, a low, wet sound, like something dragging itself through the dirt. My hands shook. I wasn't alone. Morning brought no relief. I searched the outside of the cabin, looking for footprints, anything. The ground was soft from last night's rain, but there were no tracks. Just my own boot prints leading back to the truck. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the wind had knocked a branch loose. But I knew better. I spent the day cleaning, trying to keep my mind off it. I swept the floors, scrubbed the sink, nailed boards over the worst of the broken windows. By evening, the place almost looked livable. Almost. I built a fire in the wood stove, the heat pushing back the damp chill. I ate a can of beans straight from the can, too tired to care. Then the noises started again. This time they weren't outside. They were inside the walls. A slow, wet scratching like fingers dragging over wood. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound stopped. Then something knocked back. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, a knife in my hand, listening. The scratching came and went, moving from one wall to another. Sometimes it sounded like whispering. By dawn, I was exhausted. I needed to know what was in there. I grabbed a crowbar from the truck and started prying at the wall near where the sounds were loudest. The wood was old, the nails rusted. Took effort, but finally, a board came loose. Darkness inside. I shined my flashlight into the gap. First, I saw nothing, just dust and cobwebs. Then something moved. A hand, pale, thin, fingers too long, reached out from the darkness. I stumbled back, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The hand flexed, then slowly retreated into the wall. I didn't wait. I ran. The truck wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but the engine just groaned. Behind me, the cabin stood silent. Then the front door creaked open. I didn't look. I jumped out of the truck and ran into the woods. Branches whipped at my face. My lungs burned. I didn't stop. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. Then I turned. Nothing followed me. It took hours to reach the main road. A passing truck picked me up, the driver eyeing my dirty clothes and wild expression. "You okay, son?" I didn't answer. I looked back at the woods. Somewhere in there, the cabin waited, and whatever was inside it. I never went back. The lawyer called a week later, asking why I hadn't signed the papers. I told him to sell it, burn it. I didn't care. Sometimes, though, I still hear the scratching, even in my new apartment miles away, like something's still in the walls. The thought repeats in my head like a broken record as I stand in the middle of the cabin, my breath fogging in the cold air. The walls are made of rough, dark wood, the kind that creaks with every shift of the wind. The single window is smeared with grime, letting in only a dull gray light from the overcast sky outside. The floorboards groan under my weight, each step sounding like a warning. I came here to get away. From the city, from the noise, from everything. A week alone in the woods sounded like a good idea at the time. No phone, no people, just silence. But now, standing in this place, I realize how stupid that was. The cabin isn't mine. I found it by accident, half hidden behind thick pines, its roof sagging like an old man's shoulders. The door was unlocked. No signs of life inside, just dust and the stale smell of something long abandoned. I figured no one would mind if I stayed a night or two. That was 3 days ago. First, it was fine. The quiet was nice. The woods were peaceful. But then the noises started. Last night, I woke up to something scratching at the door. Not like an animal, too slow, too deliberate. I lay there, frozen, listening as it dragged something sharp along the wood. Then it stopped, just like that. I didn't sleep after that. This morning, I found marks on the door, deep grooves like something had been testing its strength. Now, as the light fades, I know I'm not alone. I checked the lock on the door again. It's flimsy, just a rusty bolt that barely holds. The window is too small to climb through, and even if I broke it, the drop outside is steep, jagged rocks waiting below. I should leave. Now, I grab my backpack, shoving in the little food I have left. My hands shake as I zip it up. The air in the cabin feels heavier, like it's pressing down on me. Then I hear it, a footstep, outside. Not an animal, too heavy, too human. My breath catches. I don't move. The sound comes again, closer this time. Slow, purposeful. There's no time to think. I grab the knife from the table, the one I've been using to cut firewood. The handle is rough against my palm. The doorknob rattles. I back up, my heart hammering. The bolt won't hold. I know it won't. The rattling stops. Silence. Then, a thud. The door shakes in its frame. Again, harder this time, with splinters. The bolt bends. I'm out of options. I turn and run for the back room, the one with the loose floorboard I noticed yesterday. I drop to my knees, prying it up with my fingers. The space underneath is small, just enough to squeeze into. I lower myself down just as the door crashes open. The darkness swallows me. I pull the floorboard back into place, leaving only the thinnest crack to see through. Boots. Heavy, mud-caked boots step inside. They stop in the middle of the room. I don't breathe. The figure turns slowly, scanning the cabin. I can't see his face, just the outline of him. Tall, broad-shouldered, a shotgun hanging loosely in one hand. He knows I'm here. He takes a step toward the back room. I grip the knife tighter. Then a noise outside, a branch snapping. The man stops, turns his head. For a second, nothing happens. Then he walks out, the door swinging shut behind him. I don't move, not for a long time. When I finally crawl out, the cabin is empty. The door hangs broken. Outside, the woods are silent. I don't wait. I run. The trees blur past me, branches whipping at my arms. I don't look back. I don't stop until I reach the road. A truck passes. I wave my arms, desperate. It slows, stops. The driver rolls down the window. "You all right?" I don't answer. I just climb in. As the truck pulls away, I glance back at the woods. Somewhere in there, the cabin waits, and so does he. The road was barely a road, just two dirt tracks cutting through the forest, swallowed by weeds and potholes. My headlights barely held back the dark, the beams shaking as the car bounced over roots and rocks. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, the signal lost somewhere in the endless sea of trees. All I had was a scribbled note with directions, the ink smudged from rain. Asterisk left at the fork, right after the dead oak. Follow the creek until the bridge. Asterisk. But there was no bridge, just a collapsed heap of rotted wood, half sunk in black water. I killed the engine. The silence was worse than the drive. No wind, no animals, just the slow drip of water from the trees. The cabin was supposed to be close. A weekend getaway, cheap and quiet. That's what the listing said. No neighbors, no noise, just peace. I stepped out. The air was thick, wet, the kind of cold that sticks to your skin. My boots sank into mud as I walked toward the tree line, flashlight cutting a shaky path ahead. The cabin had to be here. The guy who rented it said so. Can't miss it. But the forest didn't feel right. The trees were too close, their trunks knotted and twisted. Branches scraped at my jacket like fingers. Every step made a sound. A snap, a crunch too loud in the quiet. I kept walking, my breath fogging in front of me. The beam of my flashlight caught something ahead. A shape, the cabin. It was smaller than I expected. The wood was dark, almost black, the roof sagging in the middle. The porch steps groaned under my weight. The door was unlocked. Inside smelled like dust and something else, something sour. The floorboards creaked as I stepped in. The living room was bare except for an old couch, its fabric torn, stuffing spilling out. A single lamp sat on a table, the bulb dead. The kitchen was worse. The sink was stained brown, the faucet dripping. A single plate sat on the counter, crusted with something I didn't want to look at too close. I dropped my bag on the couch. The silence was heavier in here. The walls felt too thin, like they were holding their breath. I told myself it was just an old cabin. Nothing wrong with that. Night came fast. I lit a fire in the fireplace, the wood damp, the flames weak. The light flickered over the walls, making shadows twist. I sat on the couch, listening to the wind pick up outside. It sounded like whispers. Then I heard the scratching. At first, I thought it was branches against the roof, but it was too sharp, too deliberate, like something dragging claws over wood. Came from the walls, then the floor, then the ceiling. I stood up. My heart was pounding. The fire cast long shadows, and for a second, I thought I saw something move in the corner. Just a trick of the light. The scratching stopped. I didn't sleep. Morning didn't bring relief. The forest was still too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the same heavy silence. I walked outside, the cold biting my face. The trees stood like sentinels, watching. I followed the edge of the cabin, looking for what could have made the noise. Maybe an animal, maybe the wind. Then I saw them. Footprints, not mine. They started at the tree line, leading right up to the cabin. But they didn't go back. I ran inside, locking the door. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course, the rest of the day passed in slow terror. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow looked wrong. I kept the fire going, the knife from the kitchen in my hand. Night fell again. The scratching came back, louder this time, closer, then knocking. Not on the door, on the walls, the windows. Something was outside. I backed into the corner, the knife raised. The knocking turned into pounding. The whole cabin shook. The windows rattled. Something wanted in. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. A creak from the hallway. The bedroom door slowly swung open. I wasn't alone. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring into the dark hallway. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something metallic. My fingers tightened around the knife, my knuckles white. Then I saw it, a shadow moving just beyond the doorframe. Not an animal. Too tall, too still. I didn't wait. I ran. The front door slammed open as I burst outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap. I didn't look back. The trees blurred as I sprinted, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life. As I peeled out, my headlights swept across the tree line. Something stood there. A man, tall, thin. His clothes were torn, his skin too pale. He didn't move, just watched as I drove away. I didn't stop until I hit pavement, until there were streetlights and other cars. I never went back. Later, I looked up the cabin online. The listing was gone. No record of it ever existing. But I found something else. A news article from years ago. A man had lived out there, alone. They found his body deep in the woods. No one ever found the people who went missing near his land. I still hear the scratching sometimes, when the house is too quiet, when the wind sounds like whispers. The thought repeats in my head like a broken record as I stand in the middle of the woods, the cold biting into my skin. The trees loom over me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the gray sky. My breath comes out in white puffs, dissolving into the freezing air. I pull my jacket tighter around me, but it doesn't help. The wind cuts right through. I didn't plan for this. A weekend alone in a cabin. Just me, some books, and the quiet. No people, no noise, no stress. That's what I wanted. Now, as the sun dips below the horizon, I realize how stupid that idea was. The cabin is old, older than I expected. The wooden planks are warped, the roof sagging in the middle like it's about to cave in. The front porch creaks under my weight as I step onto it, the sound too loud in the silence. I fumble with the keys, my fingers numb from the cold. The lock sticks, but after a few tries, the door swings open with a groan. The inside smells like dust and mildew. The air is thick, stale. I drop my bag by the door and flick the light switch. Nothing happens. I try again. Still dark. Great. I pull out my phone, no signal. Of course. I dig through my bag for the flashlight I packed. The beam cuts through the darkness, revealing a small living area with a couch covered in a dusty sheet, a wood stove in the corner, and a kitchenette with chipped countertops. The windows are grimy, barely letting in the last traces of daylight. I tell myself it's fine, just a rustic cabin, no big deal. I start a fire in the stove, the dry wood catching quickly. The warmth feels good, but the light it casts only makes the shadows deeper. The walls seem to close in around me, the silence pressing against my ears. I should sleep. Tomorrow I'll hike, maybe fish if the lake isn't frozen. Normal cabin stuff. But as I lie on the stiff mattress in the back room, I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. Then I hear it, a scrape, like something dragging against the outside wall. I sit up, straining to listen. The wind howls, branches tapping against the roof. Maybe that's all it was. Then it comes again, closer this time. My heart pounds. I grab the flashlight and shine it toward the window. The glass is fogged, but through the grime, I see nothing but black. I tell myself it's an animal, a raccoon, a deer, anything but what my brain is screaming at me. Then the doorknob rattles. I freeze. It's not the wind. The door is locked, but the knob twists slowly, deliberately. Someone's out there. I don't move, don't breathe. The rattling stops. Silence. Then a thud, like a shoulder slamming into the wood. The door holds, but barely. Another hit. The frame splinters. I scramble off the bed, backing into the corner. My hands shake as I grab the fireplace poker from beside the stove. It's heavy, solid. The door bursts open. A man stands in the doorway, silhouetted by the moonlight. Tall, broad-shouldered. His face is hidden in shadow, but I can see his breath in the cold air. He steps inside. I don't think. I swing. The poker connects with his head with a sickening crack. He stumbles but doesn't go down. I swing again. This time he drops. I don't wait to see if he gets up. I run. Out the door into the freezing night. Branches whip at my face as I crash through the trees. My lungs burn. My legs ache. But I don't stop. I don't look back. I don't know how long I run. The woods stretch endlessly, the trees all looking the same. My feet slip on icy patches, my hands numb from the cold. Then I see it, a light, a house. I pound on the door, screaming for help. An older man answers, his face alarmed. He pulls me inside, shouting for his wife to call the police. I collapse on the floor, shaking, my body giving out. The police come. They find the cabin. They find the man. He's alive, barely. Turns out he's been hiding in these woods for years. A fugitive, killer, and I was his next target. But I got away. I don't go back to cabins after that. Some quiet isn't worth the risk. The road was barely a road anymore. Just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed by mud and overgrown roots. My car groaned as it lurched over another pothole, the headlights flickering against the thick pine trunks. The GPS had given up an hour ago, and now I was driving blind, following the shaky directions scrawled on a napkin by the old man at the gas station. Asterisk, follow the river until you see the fork. Take the left. Cabin's about 2 miles in. Can't miss it. Asterisk, I could definitely miss it. The woods were too dark, too quiet. No crickets, no owls, just the creak of branches rubbing together in the wind. The air smelled damp, like wet earth and rotting leaves. The cabin wasn't even mine. It belonged to my uncle, a man I hadn't seen since I was 12. When the lawyer called to say he was dead and left me the place in his will, I almost said no. But the city was choking me. The noise, the people, the constant buzz of life. I needed quiet, or at least that's what I told myself. The tires crunched over gravel as I pulled up to the clearing. The cabin was smaller than I remembered, hunched under the weight of the trees like it was trying to hide. The wood was gray and splintered, the roof sagging in the middle. A single window stared back at me, the glass smudged with dirt. I killed the engine. The silence rushed in, pressing against my ears. For a second, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Something felt off. Not wrong, exactly, but uneasy, like the woods were holding their breath. I stepped out. The ground was soft under my boots, the kind of soft that meant rain had soaked deep into the soil. My backpack thumped against my shoulder as I walked to the door, the key cold in my hand. The lock was stiff, rusted from years of neglect. I had to shove my shoulder against the wood to get it open. The smell hit me first, mold, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic. Old blood, maybe, or just the rot of the place settling in. The inside was exactly how I remembered it. A single room with a wood stove in the corner, a sagging cot against the wall, and a table littered with yellowed newspapers. The air was thick, stale. I dropped my bag on the floor and coughed, waving a hand in front of my face. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint, just smudges in the dust, but they were fresh. Too fresh. Someone had been here recently. My throat tightened. I wasn't supposed to be here for another week. The lawyer had said the place was empty, locked up since my uncle died. I moved slowly, quietly, listening for any sound beyond the creak of the floorboards under my weight. The footprints led to the back of the cabin, toward the small storage closet. The door was slightly ajar. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. The hinges whined as I pulled. The closet was empty except for a few rusted tools and a pile of old blankets. But the blankets had been moved recently, shoved aside to reveal a trapdoor in the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears. The trapdoor was heavy, the wood rough under my fingers as I lifted it. A set of narrow stairs led down into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold, damp, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I didn't have a flashlight, just the dim glow from my phone screen as I took the first step down. The wood groaned under my weight. The basement was smaller than I expected, just a cramped, dirt-walled room. But the smell was worse here, sour, like sweat and something spoiled. My phone light flickered over the ground, and that's when I saw them. The bones. Not animal bones. Human. A skull stared up at me from the dirt, the jaw hanging open like it had been screaming when it died. Ribs, femurs, finger bones. All scattered, some still half buried. And in the corner, a pile of clothes, rotted but unmistakable. Flannel shirt, jeans, boots, my uncle's clothes. But that didn't make sense. The lawyer said he died in a hospital. Then I saw the knife. It was buried in the dirt near the bones, the blade rusted but still sharp. And next to it, a second set of footprints, smaller, narrower. Someone else had been down here. Recently. I backed up, my breath coming too fast. This wasn't just some old crime scene. Someone had been here. Someone who knew about this place. The floorboard above me creaked. I froze. There was someone in the cabin. I turned off my phone screen, plunging the basement into darkness. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Another creak, then another. Slow, deliberate steps. They knew I was here. I didn't have a weapon, just the knife in the dirt. I grabbed it, the handle rough against my palm. The footsteps stopped right above me. Then the trapdoor slammed shut. The darkness was absolute. No light, no sound except my own ragged breathing. I stumbled up the stairs, shoving against the door. It didn't budge. Something heavy had been placed on top. I was trapped. I don't know how long I stayed there, pounding on the wood until my fists ached. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. The smell of the bones filled my nose, my mouth. Then I heard it. A scrape. Metal on wood. The wood stove. They were lighting a fire. Smoke curled through the cracks in the floorboards. At first, it was just a haze, but then it thickened, stinging my eyes, clawing at my lungs. I coughed, pressing my shirt over my face. They weren't just trapping me. They were burning the cabin down. With me inside, I dropped to the dirt, feeling along the walls for anything. A weak spot, a loose board. My fingers hit something cold. A pipe. The cabin's water line, maybe. It was rusted, thin. I grabbed the knife and stabbed at it over and over until the metal gave way. Water sprayed out, soaking the dirt. I didn't care. I kept digging, clawing at the wall where the pipe disappeared into the earth. The smoke was everywhere now. My head spun, my vision blurred, but I kept digging. Then there, a gap just big enough to squeeze through. The pipe led outside under the foundation. I shoved myself into the hole, dirt scraping my arms, my face. The pipe bent, then broke open into the night. I tumbled out, gasping, my lungs burning. The cabin was fully ablaze now, flames licking up the walls. I rolled onto my back, coughing, staring at the fire. That's when I saw them. A figure standing at the tree line, watching. I couldn't make out their face, just the outline of a person, still and silent. Then, slowly, they turned and walked into the woods. I didn't follow. I just lay there, shaking, as the cabin burned. The police found me the next morning. They asked questions about the bones, about the fire. I told them everything. They never found the person in the woods. But sometimes, when I'm back in the city, surrounded by noise and people, I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear footsteps outside my door, and I wonder if they're still watching. The thought pounds in my head like a hammer as I stand in the middle of the cabin, my breath coming out in short, ragged bursts. The air is thick with the smell of damp wood and something else, something rotten. The walls are old, the wood warped and cracked, and the single window is so grimy it barely lets in any light. Outside, the wind howls through the trees, branches scraping against the roof like fingernails on bone. I don't know how long I've been here. Hours? Days? Time doesn't feel real anymore. Started as a stupid idea, just a weekend trip to clear my head. I needed to get away from the city, from the noise, from everything. The cabin was supposed to be empty, abandoned. No one had lived here in years, or so I thought. The first night was fine. I built a fire, ate the food I brought, and tried to ignore how the silence pressed against my ears like a physical thing. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I told myself it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. But then the doorknob rattled. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. No one knew I was here. No one. I hadn't told a soul where I was going. The rattling stopped, and for a second I thought maybe I imagined it. Then the scratching started, long, slow drags against the door, like someone running their fingers down the wood. I didn't sleep that night. Morning came, gray and cold. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the wind had moved a branch against the door. Maybe the cabin was just settling. But then I saw the footprints in the mud outside, boot prints, leading right up to the door and then circling the cabin before disappearing into the trees. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. I packed my things, hands shaking. I wasn't staying another night. But when I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. The lock was jammed. No, not jammed. Something was holding it shut from the outside. I yanked harder, panic rising in my throat. Then I heard it, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the porch. They were barricading me in. I ran to the window, but the wood was too thick to break. My phone had no signal. No one was coming. I was trapped. The scratching came again, louder this time. Then a knock, 3 slow, deliberate raps against the door. I backed away, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The knocking turned into pounding, the whole door shaking in its frame. Then silence. I waited, ears straining. Nothing. Then the smell hit me, gasoline. I lunged for the back door, but it was blocked too. Smoke curled under the front door. They had set the cabin on fire. I grabbed a chair and swung it at the window with all my strength. The glass shattered, and cold air rushed in. I didn't think, just climbed through, ignoring the shards slicing into my arms. I hit the ground running, legs pumping as the heat of the flames roared behind me. I didn't look back. I just ran, branches whipping at my face, lungs burning. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally collapsed onto the road, a truck screeched to a stop beside me. The driver's face was pale as he helped me inside. As we sped away, I looked back at the woods. The smoke rose in a thick black column against the sky, and for just a second, I thought I saw a figure standing at the tree line, watching. Then the trees swallowed him. I never went back, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the scratching. The road was barely a road anymore, just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed by weeds and potholes. My headlights flickered over the uneven ground as the car jolted over rocks and roots. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, and now I was just following the fading tire tracks of whoever had been here last. I shouldn't have come. The cabin wasn't even mine. It belonged to my uncle, a man I hadn't seen in years. When the lawyer called to tell me he was dead and that the place was now mine, I figured I'd sell it quick. No point keeping a rotting shack in the middle of nowhere. But then I lost my job, the rent went up, and suddenly, the idea of hiding out here for a while didn't seem so bad. Big mistake. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the car like bony fingers. The air smelled damp, like wet earth and something else, something sour. I rolled the window down a crack, listening. No birds, no wind, just silence. Then I saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, its wooden walls sagging under years of neglect. The roof was patchy with missing shingles, and the front porch leaned to one side like it might collapse any second. Weeds had grown up through the floorboards, twisting around the legs of an old rocking chair that swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze. I killed the engine and sat there, staring. The place looked worse than I remembered. When I was a kid, Uncle Rick used to bring me up here to fish. Back then, it felt like an adventure. Now, it just felt wrong. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The ground was soft under my boots, the mud sucking at my soles with every step. The air was colder here, like the trees were holding the chill close to the earth. I made my way to the door, my fingers brushing against the rough wood. The lock was rusted, but it gave way with a hard shove. The inside was worse. Dust floated in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The furniture was covered in yellowed sheets, and the floor creaked under my weight like it might give way. A musty smell hung in the air. Mold, old food, something else I couldn't name. I dropped my bag on the table and wiped my hands on my jeans. The place needed work, but it was shelter. For now, that was enough. I spent the next hour clearing out the worst of the mess, dragging old newspapers and empty bottles into a pile by the door. The silence was getting to me, so I dug out a portable radio from my bag and turned it on. Static. I twisted the dial, but nothing came through. Just that same hissing white noise, like the forest itself was breathing into the speaker. I shut it off. Night came fast. The trees swallowed the last of the sunlight, and soon the only light came from my lantern, casting long shadows on the walls. I tried to sleep, but the bed smelled like mildew, and every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard something moving outside. Then the scratching started. At first, I thought it was branches against the roof, but it was too deliberate, too close, like something was dragging its nails along the outside walls. I sat up, gripping the lantern. The sound moved, circling the cabin. Slow, purposeful. I wasn't alone. My heart pounded as I crept to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. The trees were black shapes against the darker sky. Nothing moved. Then I saw it. A figure standing just at the edge of the clearing. Tall, thin, just watching. I ducked down, my breath coming in short gasps. Who the hell was out there? The scratching came again, this time at the door. I grabbed the hunting knife from my bag and held it tight. The door rattled in its frame, like someone was testing the lock. Then silence. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaking. Maybe it was just some animal. Maybe I was imagining things. Then the window shattered. Glass exploded inward as something crashed through. I barely had time to turn before it was on me. A man, his face gaunt, his eyes wild. He smelled like sweat and dirt and something metallic. Blood. We hit the floor, my knife skidding out of reach. His hands closed around my throat, his breath hot against my face. I clawed at his arms, kicking, but he was stronger. The world started to go dark. Then a crack. The man's grip loosened. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward. Behind him stood another figure, a woman gripping a rusted pipe. She was breathing hard, her knuckles white around the weapon. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The ending. The woman's name was Mara. She'd been hiding in the woods for weeks, ever since he started hunting her. The man on the floor wasn't just some random intruder, he was a killer. A drifter who'd been stalking these woods for months, picking off hikers, campers, anyone dumb enough to wander too far from town. The cabin wasn't safe. It never had been. We left before dawn, driving in silence until the trees thinned and the first signs of civilization appeared. I didn't look back. The police found the man's camp later. A shallow grave with bones, IDs, scraps of clothing. Enough to close a dozen missing persons cases. I sold the cabin, never went back. Sometimes, though, I still hear the scratching, and I wonder if he was really the only one out there. The road was supposed to save me time, cutting through the dense stretch of forest known as the Black Pines. Just a narrow, gravel-strewn path barely wide enough for my truck, winding between towering pines that blocked out most of the sky. The GPS had flickered out an hour ago, but I wasn't worried. I had a full tank, a map in the glove box, and enough supplies to last me until I reached the next town. Then the rain started. Came down in sheets, hammering against the windshield so hard I could barely see. The gravel turned to mud, slick and treacherous, and my tires spun uselessly for a second before catching again. I slowed down, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of the truck like skeletal fingers. That's when I saw the cabin. It was tucked back in a clearing, half hidden by the storm. A small, square thing with a sagging roof and dark windows. No lights, no smoke from the chimney. Just a lone structure in the middle of nowhere. I should have kept driving, but the mud was getting worse and the sky was getting darker. I didn't want to risk getting stuck out here overnight. So I pulled over, killed the engine, and sat there for a minute, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Then I stepped out. The cold hit me first, sharp and wet, seeping through my jacket in seconds. The ground was a swamp, sucking at my boots with every step. I moved fast, head down, until I reached the cabin's porch. The wood groaned under my weight, rotten in places. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, half expecting something to jump out at me, but there was nothing, just darkness and the smell of damp wood and something else. Something sour like old meat. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, revealing a single room with a rusted stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a cot against the far wall. The floor was littered with empty cans, their labels peeled off. A hunting rifle leaned against the wall near the door, its barrel caked in dust. Someone had been here, recently. I moved deeper inside, my boots crunching over broken glass. The air was thick, stale. I swept the light across the walls and froze. Handprints, dozens of them, smeared in something dark and flaking. Blood. My stomach twisted. I took a step back, my pulse hammering in my throat. That's when I heard it. A creak. Not from the wind, not from the rain, from the corner. I turned the light toward it. The cot was empty, but beneath it something moved. A hand. Pale fingers curled around the edge of the cot, gripping it tight. Then another. Then a head rose slowly, matted hair hanging in clumps over a face streaked with dirt and dried blood. A man, not dead, watching me. His eyes were wide, unblinking. His lips peeled back from yellow teeth in something that wasn't a smile. I didn't wait to see what he did next. I ran. The door slammed behind me as I bolted for the truck. The mud dragged at my legs, slowing me down. I could hear him behind me, the wet slap of bare feet, the ragged breathing. I wrenched the truck door open and threw myself inside. My hands shook as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. The tires spun, spraying mud as I fishtailed onto the road. The headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the trees, the road, and him, standing in the middle of the path. I swerved, barely missing him. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, watching as I disappeared into the storm. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway. The police found the cabin 3 days later. Empty. No blood. No rifle. No sign of anyone living there. But they did find something. Beneath the cot. A hole. Just big enough for a man to crawl into. And deep enough that no one knew where it led. The road was barely a road anymore, just a narrow strip of dirt cutting through the trees, swallowed by roots and weeds. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog, the beams bouncing off the mist like something solid. The GPS had stopped working an hour ago, and now I was just driving blind, hoping I hadn't missed the turn. The cabin was supposed to be a retreat, a place to get away from everything. No phone signal, no people, just quiet. My friend Mark had told me about it, said his uncle owned it, that it was safe, that no one would bother me there. I should have known better. The tires crunched over gravel as I pulled up to the cabin. It was smaller than I expected, just a single-story wooden box with a slanted roof, the kind of place that looked like it had been built in a weekend and forgotten about. The windows were dark, the porch sagging under the weight of years. A single rocking chair sat near the door, swaying slightly in the wind. I turned off the engine. The silence was immediate, pressing in from all sides. No birds, no insects, just the creak of old wood and the whisper of leaves. I grabbed my bag and stepped out. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for early October. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked to the door. The key was under the mat, just like Mark said. Rusted, but it turned in the lock with a groan. The inside smelled like dust and mildew. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. I flicked the light switch, nothing. Of course, no electricity. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam across the room. A couch covered in a stained sheet, a wood stove in the corner, a small kitchenette with a chipped sink. It would do. I dropped my bag on the couch and started unpacking. Canned food, water, a sleeping bag. I wasn't planning on staying long, just a few days to clear my head. But as I moved around, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was stupid, just my mind playing tricks. The cabin was empty, had been for years. I went to the window and peered out. The fog had thickened, turning the trees into dark, shapeless shadows. Nothing moved. I turned away. The first night was the worst. I lay in the sleeping bag, listening to the wind howl outside. The cabin groaned like it was alive, every gust making the walls shift. I told myself it was just the cold, just the wood settling. But then I heard it, a soft thump from the other room. I froze. Could have been anything. A branch hitting the roof, an animal outside. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like a footstep. I held my breath, waiting. Silence. Then another thump, closer this time. My heart hammered in my chest. I slowly reached for the flashlight, fingers trembling. Click. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the doorway. Empty. I exhaled. Just my imagination. Then something moved in the corner of my vision. I jerked the light toward it. Nothing. Just shadows. I forced myself to stand, my legs unsteady. The floor creaked as I stepped toward the door. The hallway was pitch black, the flashlight barely piercing it. I took another step. A hand grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly, scrambling back. The flashlight rolled across the floor, casting jagged shadows. I grabbed it, swinging the beam down. Nothing, just the floorboards. My breath came in ragged gasps. I must have imagined it. Must have. But then I saw it, a gap between the floorboards, a space underneath. I knelt, shining the light. Dust, cobwebs, and a face. Pale, sunken eyes staring up at me from below the floor. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. The face disappeared, vanishing into the dark. I didn't wait. I ran, out the door, into the night. The cold air burned my lungs as I sprinted toward the car. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. The road was a blur as I sped away, the trees whipping past. I didn't stop until I hit pavement, until I saw streetlights. I never told anyone. No one would believe me, but sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear the creak of floorboards, and I know something is underneath.